I still remember the sound that started it all. Not the loud, dramatic kind you hear in movies. No, it was a soft tapping, then a grinding. Then the dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree announcing the end of our luck. I was 2 blocks from home when my car shuddered, lurched, and gave up. I coasted it onto the curb, turned the key again, and heard nothing but a weak click, like the engine was too tired to try anymore. And honestly, so was I. I leaned back in the seat, staring at the cracked windshield, knowing exactly what this meant. I checked my bank app with a pit in my stomach. $28. Rent was due in 6 days. Groceries were low. Gas tank was almost empty. And we had already maxed out the little line of credit we swore we would only use for emergencies. I sat there for a long minute, listening to the quiet. I felt the kind of embarrassment that doesn't have words. I'm a 35-year-old man with a full-time job, a wife I love more than anything, and somehow I couldn't even keep a car running long enough to make it through the month. But the real punch to the chest came 2 nights later. Daniela's voice cracked over the phone before she even told me what happened. Her car had stalled in the parking lot of her job. Of course it did, because why would life pick any other moment? She missed an entire shift, got written up, and cried on the ride home in her coworker's passenger seat. 2 cars down in the same week. 2 incomes shaken. 2 people pretending we weren't scared out of our minds. I sat on the edge of our bed that night, watching her try to hold herself together. Her cheeks were blotchy, and she kept apologizing like she had done something wrong. "I'm sorry, Carlos. I know we needed that shift. I know." "It's not your fault," I said, even though part of me felt like everything was my fault. Here's the truth I wasn't ready to admit back then. We weren't just struggling. We were fragile. One unplanned bill could knock us flat. One missed shift could throw everything off. One broken down car, let alone 2, could tip our entire life over. And as I sat there holding Daniela's trembling hand, I realized something I had been avoiding for years. We weren't living paycheck to paycheck because life was unfair. We were living paycheck to paycheck because we had no cushion, no plan, no savings, nothing to catch us when reality finally hit. And it had hit hard. That night, staring at the bills piled on the dresser and the blinking router light casting shadows on the wall, a single question echoed in my mind like a warning I could no longer ignore. How did we let it get this bad? If you had asked me a year before all this whether we were struggling financially, I would have laughed it off. "We're fine," I used to say, brushing my hand through the air like I was swatting away a fly. And I genuinely believed that. We paid our bills. We showed up to work. We didn't have credit collectors calling us. So in my mind, that meant we were doing okay. But the truth is, paycheck to paycheck doesn't announce itself with flashing lights and warning sirens. It creeps in quietly, almost politely, showing up in the small cracks of your life long before it becomes a crisis. For us, it started with convenience. We were tired from shifts, so we picked up fast food instead of cooking. We didn't want to deal with budgeting, so we trusted our memory instead of writing anything down. We convinced ourselves certain habits were normal, like using the credit card for groceries when payday was still 3 days away. Those little choices didn't feel dangerous at the time. They felt harmless, but they stacked up like bricks building a wall around us. I used to tell myself, next month we'll save, but next month always arrived with something waiting at the door: an overdue bill, a birthday, a coworker's gathering, a sale that felt too good to pass up. Before long, every dollar had a destination except the ones we desperately needed for emergencies. We created this illusion that because we made $92,000 combined, we should be comfortable. But money doesn't care about what you should be. It only cares about what you actually do with it. I didn't want to face that reality. Neither did Daniela. We avoided talking about money because every conversation felt like a fight waiting to happen. She didn't want to stress me out. I didn't want to make her feel like she had to cut back on the few things that made her happy. So we just didn't talk. We let silence do the heavy lifting. And silence is expensive. The argument started small. "Didn't you say you were going to pay that bill?" Or, "Why is the credit card balance higher this month?" But they piled up until even the good days felt tense. Looking back, I think we both knew we were sinking. But acknowledging it would have meant admitting we didn't have control. And for 2 hardworking adults trying their best, that felt like failure. Instead, we kept telling ourselves the same lie. It's just a rough month. Except every month was a rough month. We just didn't want to call it what it was. By the time the double car breakdown hit, we weren't falling apart because of bad luck. We were falling apart because we had spent years pretending everything was fine. And pretending is the most expensive habit we ever had. If the first car dying felt like a warning shot, the second one was a full-blown alarm. And it didn't just disrupt our routine, it ripped the floor out from under us. The morning Daniela's car gave out, she left the house smiling. She had braided her hair, packed her lunch, and even teased me about how I always lost my socks in the dryer. We both thought the day would be normal, quiet, manageable. Then my phone rang at 9 a.m. Her voice was shaking, breathless, the kind of panic that comes from trying not to cry in public. "Carlos, my car won't start. I tried 3 times. It just clicks." Clicking. That cursed clicking sound again. I could hear the embarrassment in her voice, how she tried to laugh it off but couldn't. A coworker ended up driving her to work, but by then she was 40 minutes late. They didn't care why. They didn't want excuses. They wrote her up anyway. When her shift finally ended, the same coworker had to take her home. I met her in the parking lot, watching her step out of someone else's car like a guest in her own life. She looked small, defeated. She kept apologizing like she had let us down. We drove to check her car together, but all it did was click at us, mocking us. Another repair bill we couldn't afford. Another problem we didn't have a plan for. We had 2 cars. Now we had none. And that changed everything. Without transportation, we were missing hours, then missing full shifts. That meant smaller paychecks. And smaller paychecks meant we couldn't pay the bills already waiting in a pile on the kitchen table. The electric bill was due that week. The rent grace period was shrinking. The credit card minimums were creeping up. And the line of credit was already at its limit. I remember sitting in our living room that night, surrounded by the quiet hum of a fan that couldn't drown out the storm in my chest. Daniela was curled up on the couch, griping a pillow like it could hold her together. "We're falling behind," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know," I said, even though admitting it felt like swallowing sand. The scary part wasn't just the breakdowns, it was everything that came after the chain reaction of consequences that exposed every weakness we'd been ignoring. We couldn't go to work. We couldn't fix the cars. We couldn't catch up. And worst of all, we couldn't pretend anymore. That was the moment the denial finally cracked. Not with yelling, not with a dramatic fight, but with the quiet realization that we were slipping into a hole we didn't know how to climb out of. And the scariest part? We were still trying to handle it alone. The night everything cracked open wasn't loud. No shouting, no slamming doors, no dramatic "I'm done." It was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of quiet where you finally hear the truth you've been running from. I walked into the kitchen and saw Daniela sitting on the floor, her back against the cabinet, surrounded by unopened envelopes. Not bills, we knew what those looked like, but envelopes we avoided touching because opening them meant accepting reality. She was turning one over and over in her hands, staring at it like it was something fragile. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. And that was it. The sentence that broke whatever pride I still had. I sat down beside her, not in a chair, not at the table, but right there on the cold tile floor, because that's where we were emotionally, on the floor. She didn't look at me at first. She just kept rubbing her thumb across the edge of an overdue notice, like she was trying to erase the print. "I feel like I'm failing us," she said. "I feel like no matter how hard we work, it's never enough." Hearing her say the words I'd been choking on for months hit me harder than any bill ever could. I'd been holding on to this stupid idea that I had to be the one with the answers, that I had to be strong for both of us. But in reality, we were both exhausted, both scared, both drowning quietly in our separate corners. "We can't keep pretending," I finally said. That was the first honest sentence I had spoken about our finances in years. Everything poured out after that. I admitted how terrified I was when my car died. She admitted she cried in the bathroom at work more times than she wanted me to know. I told her I felt embarrassed being 35 with zero savings. She told me she felt guilty every time she bought anything that wasn't a necessity, even a $3 coffee. We weren't mad at each other. We were mad at the situation, at ourselves, at the years of ignoring what needed attention. At one point, I reached for her hand and she let out a shaky breath, like she had been holding it for months. "Whatever happens," I told her, "we face it together. No more pretending." For the first time in a long time, we both cried, not from fear this time, but from relief. Relief that the silence was over. Relief that we weren't carrying this alone anymore. Relief that even though our life was a mess, at least we were finally being honest enough to clean it up. That night, sitting on the tile floor, surrounded by overdue bills, we made a decision. Not a plan yet. Not a strategy. Just a decision to stop hiding from reality. And that decision was the first brick in the foundation we didn't know we were about to rebuild. The morning after our kitchen floor breakdown, the sunlight came in warm and soft, but everything still felt heavy. The bills were still there, the cars were still dead, the money was still gone. Nothing had magically fixed itself overnight. But something inside us had shifted. We weren't pretending anymore. And that made the next step unavoidable. We needed help. It was Daniela who said it first. "We could call my aunt," she murmured over her coffee, fingers tapping the mug like her nerves were trying to escape through her skin. I froze. Aunt Rosa. The woman was practically a legend in the family, a retired factory worker who knew every coupon code before it existed, lived off lists and envelopes, and could stretch $1 until it begged for mercy. She was the relative who brought a budget binder to Thanksgiving and once lectured Daniela's cousin for buying shoes at full price like a millionaire. Asking her for help meant exposing everything, our spending, our habits, our pride, our failures. It meant letting someone see the unedited version of our life. And I hated that idea. I didn't want to look weak. I didn't want to look incompetent. I didn't want the judgment that would definitely follow. But as I stared at the stack of due dates pinned to the fridge, reality made the decision for me. Pride wasn't paying the bills. Pride wasn't fixing the cars. Pride wasn't saving us. "Call her," I said quietly. Daniela hesitated for a moment, like saying it out loud might make the situation feel too real, but she dialed anyway. I watched her face during the call, first nervous, then embarrassed, then relieved when Rosa didn't lecture her right away. Daniela explained everything, the missed shifts, the broken cars, the overdue bills, the paycheck-to-paycheck cycle finally catching up to us. She apologized so many times that I lost count. Rosa listened. Then she said one sentence that told us exactly what was coming next. "I'll be there in the morning. Don't clean anything up." Translation: prepare yourselves. I barely slept that night. I kept thinking about how she'd flip through our bank statements with that look of "I told you so," how she'd point out every dumb purchase, how she'd find every crack we tried to hide. And yet, a part of me felt hopeful. Not happy, not excited, just hopeful in the smallest, most fragile way. When Rosa showed up the next morning, she didn't waste a second. She walked in with a tote bag filled with notebooks, labeled envelopes, highlighters, and a calculator that looked like it survived the 1980s. Her face was stern, but her eyes were kind, in a tough love kind of way. "Let's get started," she said. No hugs. No small talk. No warm-up. Just the truth we'd been avoiding, finally arriving at our kitchen table. And whether we were ready or not, the real work was about to begin. Aunt Rosa didn't sit down gently. She landed in the chair like she had a mission and limited time to complete it. She pulled out her cracked edges notebook, slapped it onto the table, and looked at us like we were two recruits about to enter boot camp. "First," she said, "show me everything." Everything. She meant everything: bank statements, bills, credit card balances, pay stubs, even the sticky notes on the fridge. There was something humbling about sliding those papers across the table, like admitting you lost control of the steering wheel a long time ago and someone else had to take over. She started flipping through pages with the speed and accuracy of a human calculator. At first, she didn't say anything, which was somehow worse. Then she clicked her tongue. That noise alone felt like a judgment. "Why are you paying for 5 streaming services?" she asked without looking up. "We don't have 5, Daniela started. Rosa turned the notebook around. "We had 5. "And why?" she continued. "Have you been buying takeout 4 times a week?" I swallowed hard. "We work late. We're tired." Rosa raised an eyebrow. "And you think being tired is an excuse to be broke?" That one stung. She went on, dissecting every dollar with surgical precision. The coffee runs, the random Target visits, the subscription we forgot existed, The overdraft fees, so many overdraft fees, they practically formed their own category. When she found the total amount we had spent on food for the month, she closed the notebook slowly and just stared at us. "This," she said, tapping the number, "is more than some people's rent." Daniela looked down at her hands. I stared at the floor, and Rosa, though stern, wasn't being cruel for the sake of it. She was peeling back all the layers we tried to patch over with excuses. "You two don't have an income problem," she said. "You have a planning problem, a discipline problem, a pretending everything's fine problem." It was harsh. It was embarrassing. And it was exactly what we needed to hear. Then she pulled out a stack of envelopes and set them between us. "You're going to start from zero," she said. "Every dollar gets an assignment. No more guessing, no more swiping, no more hoping. You're going to learn where your money goes before your money decides to leave on its own." I exhaled slowly. It felt like the first breath of truth I'd taken in years. "I'm not here to shame you," she added, softer than before. "I'm here because I don't want to see this marriage fall apart over something you can control." Her voice hit something inside me, something old, something tired, something ready to change. And that was the moment Daniela and I realized the intervention wasn't about numbers. It was about facing ourselves. If I thought the intervention was the hard part, I was wrong. The real battle started when we sat down to create our first actual budget, not the fake mental budget we always claimed we had. Not the "we'll just keep track in our heads" lie we told ourselves every month. A real budget on paper, with numbers that didn't care about how tired or stressed or overwhelmed we felt. Rosa handed us blank envelopes and a calculator older than our marriage. Groceries, gas, rent, utilities, sinking funds, emergency fund, personal spending, she listed. Assign every dollar. Easier said than done. The moment we started writing numbers down, reality hit like a punch to the throat. There wasn't enough. Not enough wiggle room. Not enough leftover. Not enough fun money. Not enough anything. Daniela stared at the grocery envelope as if it had personally insulted her. "This isn't enough for us to eat," she said. "It is," Rosa replied firmly. "If you plan, if you cook, if you stop shopping without a list." Daniela looked at me then, eyes sharp with frustration. "So, we're just supposed to never enjoy anything? Never relax?" I could feel my own defenses rising. "We're trying to dig out of a hole, Danny. It's not forever." She rolled her eyes. "Easy for you to say. You don't meal prep. You don't plan the groceries." That hit harder than I expected. "I'm doing the best I can." "Are you?" she said, voice cracking. "Because I feel like I'm the one who has to sacrifice the most." Rosa didn't move. She didn't interrupt. She just let us unravel, the way people do when they're finally facing the truth instead of dancing around it. The argument didn't explode. It simmered quiet, sharp, full of everything we hadn't said before. It wasn't really about groceries. It wasn't about envelopes. It was about fear. Fear of failing. Fear of not having enough. Fear of giving up comforts we used to rely on when life felt too heavy. Eventually, Daniela leaned back, rubbing her temples. "I just hate this. I hate feeling restricted." I nodded, finally understanding. "I know. I hate seeing how bad it actually is, but we can't keep living like before." The room softened a little. Rosa slid the envelopes toward us again. "Budgeting isn't punishment," she said. "It's clarity. And clarity feels uncomfortable at first, but so does staying broke." We breathed. We tried again. We adjusted numbers, cut categories, added sinking funds for car repairs, gave ourselves small, equal personal budgets so neither of us felt deprived. And somewhere between the frustration and the compromise, something shifted. We weren't fighting each other anymore. We were fighting the problem together. By the time we finished, the envelopes looked like simple stationery items laid across the table, but to us, they were something else entirely. A map out of the mess. A plan. A beginning. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't easy. But it was ours. Our first real win wasn't big. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of moment you take a picture of or celebrate with a night out. We couldn't afford one anyway. But it was the first time in a long time where financial progress felt real. It started with the emergency fund envelope. Rosa had insisted we put anything in there every week, even if it was just $5. At first, it felt pointless. $5? What is that going to fix? What is that going to save? But 5 became 10. 10 became 20. 20 became 40. And one day, I opened the envelope and realized we had $100 sitting there. Actual money, untouched, waiting. It wasn't much, but it was ours. It was intentional. It represented something we'd never had before: control. The next win came from selling things we didn't need. We listed old tools, unused kitchen appliances, clothes with tags still on them, electronics gathering dust. It was embarrassing to admit how much money we had wasted on things we barely used, but every sale felt like reclaiming a piece of the life we lost to impulse spending. Some things sold for $10, some for $50. One of my old speakers sold for $70. By the end of the month, we had $300 more than we expected. $300 we didn't have to work overtime for. $300 that didn't come from a credit card. $300 that gave us breathing room. Daniela had a win too, an unexpected one. She had been sticking to the grocery envelope religiously, planning meals, comparing prices, and hitting the clearance rack like a pro. One night, she dropped a bag of groceries on the table, smiling like she had won the lottery. "I came in under budget," she declared proudly. She saved $12. And honestly, she looked happier than I had seen her in months. Her confidence rubbed off on me. I started saying yes to overtime opportunities. I picked up a few small handyman jobs for neighbors. I stopped ignoring every problem until it turned into a crisis. Little things added up faster than I expected. By the middle of the next month, we had enough saved to tow Daniela's car to a mechanic and pay for the repairs without touching a credit card. When the engine turned over and hummed back to life, she cried in the front seat, not because of the car, but because we had done it without going deeper into debt. 2 weeks later, we did the same for my car. Not instantly, not easily, but with intention, with teamwork, with a plan. And suddenly, the world didn't feel so heavy. The bills were still real. The budget was still tight. The sacrifices still stung sometimes. But we were moving forward inch by inch, dollar by dollar. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were actually steering our life instead of being dragged behind it. Hope didn't arrive in a windfall. It arrived in moments. Small, stubborn victories that reminded us we weren't powerless. Not anymore. There's a moment in every turnaround where things finally click, not all at once, not with fireworks, but quietly. So quietly that if you weren't paying attention, you might miss it. For us, that moment came 3 months after the double car breakdown. It was the first month in years where nothing overdrafted. I didn't even notice it at first. I logged into the bank app expecting the usual heartbreak, the red numbers, the fees, the sinking feeling in my stomach, but everything was stable. The balance wasn't high, but it wasn't negative. There were no penalties, no frantic transfers between accounts, no late fees creeping in like unwanted guests. It felt strange, almost suspicious. So strange that I refreshed the app twice just to be sure. And then I walked into the kitchen, holding my phone like evidence of a miracle, and said, "Danny, we made it through the whole month without going negative." She froze mid-stir at the stove, wooden spoon in hand. "You're serious?" I nodded. She covered her mouth with her hand, eyes filling instantly, not from sadness this time, but from something softer. Something like relief, something like permission to breathe. That month wasn't easy, it wasn't comfortable, but it was controlled. We stopped buying things just to feel better. We packed lunches. We kept receipts. We talked about money openly, sometimes tearfully, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with tired laughter, but always honestly. We learned phrases we'd never used before. "Not in the budget?" "Let's wait until next month." "We'll plan for it." "This can go in a sinking fund." And instead of feeling deprived, it felt powerful. We even built a $1,000 emergency fund, our first real financial milestone. It sat in a separate account, untouched, sacred, not for impulse buys, not for fun, for emergencies only. The kind of emergencies that used to destroy us. Now, they wouldn't stand a chance. Daniela and I also started doing something we never did before, checking in with each other. How are we feeling about money this week? What categories need adjusting? Are we okay with this purchase? Those conversations used to terrify us. Now they brought us closer. I didn't expect that part. But the biggest shift wasn't the money, it was us. We stopped blaming ourselves for the past. We stopped resenting each other for the struggle. We stopped pretending everything was fine. Instead, we stood on the same side of the problem, shoulder to shoulder, fighting toward the same future. One night, as we sat on the couch balancing the envelope system for the next month, Daniela leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I'm proud of us." For the first time in a long time, I believed it. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were rebuilding. We were choosing intention over chaos. We were breaking a cycle our families had been trapped in for generations. And the best part? We weren't done yet. Sometimes I look back at that version of us, the couple sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by unopened bills, both cars dead, hope evaporating, and it feels like watching someone else's life. But then I think about how close we came to losing everything, and the memory becomes sharp again. Real, heavy. We weren't bad people. We weren't lazy. We weren't irresponsible on purpose. We were overwhelmed adults trying to outrun consequences instead of facing them. And the truth is, avoidance is expensive. Pride is expensive. Pretending is expensive. The turning point wasn't when the cars broke. It wasn't when the bills piled up. It wasn't even when we called Aunt Rosa. The real turning point was when we finally admitted the truth to ourselves. That moment of honesty, that painful, quiet confession was the first step toward every victory that followed. Without that night on the kitchen floor, none of this would have happened. We'd still be stuck in the cycle we grew up around, the same paycheck-to-paycheck survival system that had swallowed so many people in our families. But we broke it. Not all at once. Not perfectly. Not without fights or fear. But consistently, together. We rebuilt a foundation we never had before. We repaired both cars without debt. We established an emergency fund big enough to cover real problems. We cut the financial habits that were draining us dry. And most importantly, we became a team again, a real team. When I think about the couple we were before, the couple one bill away from disaster, I feel two things at the same time: shame for how long we ignored the truth, and pride for how hard we fought to rebuild everything we almost destroyed. And if you're listening to this right now, maybe you're in a similar place. Maybe you're one emergency away from the whole thing unraveling. Maybe you're scared to open the bills. Maybe talking about money feels like setting off a landmine. I get it. I promise I do. But please hear this from someone who lived it. Do not wait for disaster to force you into change. Do not let pride drag you to the edge of the cliff the way it dragged us. Start where you are, even if it's messy. Talk to the people you love, even if it's uncomfortable. Face the truth, even if it hurts. Because the life you want is fully possible on the other side of the hard conversations you've been avoiding. And if our story helped you, even a little, please like this video, subscribe, and share your own turning point in the comments. Your story might be the one that helps someone else finally take their first step